Hey, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. And I want to begin our conversation with another calamity, the last 3.5 years. How did you survive the pandemic and how did it change you?
Oh my God. Well, pandemic, I have to be really honest. I've been an educator for 24 years and I've taught K through 12. So in every different capacity. Right now, I'm currently teaching kindergarten and I was teaching kindergarten during the pandemic. Um, it really, it killed my joy for teaching. It really did. And I'm really still trying to kind of get that back, to be honest. Um, because it was just one of the hardest things I've ever done, not necessarily teaching online, but, one of the cornerstone of my teaching is really emotional connection and safety for the children that I teach. So touch is a big one of those. And so all of a sudden, not only can I not touch my students, but they're on the other side of a screen. So luckily I'd worked in television for quite a while. So I was able to kind of bring that back to the forefront. And then I actually just took what I was using with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and we would watch it every day via the internet. So we've actually done that successfully for the last 5 years in order, in a like never missed a day. So that actually, I basically got through the pandemic because Fred Rogers and I kind of partnered together,
Yeah.
and we team taught in a lot of ways. And I also made a huge decision when it came to how long I was going to have children on the screen. And so I would only have them on the screen for maybe an hour to an hour and a half every day. And then I would say, go be little, and I gave my parents lots of tools and I let them create what I needed them to do. So, for instance, like here's some letter acquisition activities or whatever. And I would let parents choose. But I had a lot of parents crying to me because they were like, I don't know how to do this. And I said, the best thing you can do is just be present. So, and I feel like there are going to be goes of the pandemic forever when it comes to I went to Africa when I visited Rwanda, and a lot of people are like post genocide effects, and like I think that anytime something is collectively a trauma, which is what the pandemic was for us, I think that we're always going to be dealing with a little bit of some aspects of that. So right now in our kindergartens classrooms, we have the toddlers and the babies that were, not born in the pandemic, but the toddlers of the pandemic. So what happened was they went from being, regular toddlers to having everybody home, but really stressed out and worried. And so that created collective anxiety as well as just some really poor habits when it came to children's entitlement, as well as their ability to focus and regulate, as well as their stamina. They just didn't have and don't have what's required of them in the classroom. So, but I really felt very proud of the work that I did because it was never about the academic progress as much as it was about the emotional connection and security that children needed during that time. And when right before we actually went into quarantine, I had a group of children, and that is the group that I mourn the most because they are the ones that I saw not get what they needed at the end of kindergarten. And I, in some ways, felt like I had lied to them because I had said it's only going to be 6 weeks. And then I never got them back. And the next time I saw them, they were in second grade, right? So it's like it just was so hard. And the book that I just recently released is all about emotional stability and connection and how we can create secure attachment with ourselves and then with our children. And that was a big one. Like those stories of those children finding them in dysregulation or heartbreak after the pandemic was really one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I've told those children, I will never stop mourning the loss of your kindergarten year because a part of me died. I felt like, because if you really are in education for the right reasons, you cannot separate your heart from your students and you cannot separate your practice from why you do what you do and how you do it. Right. So that's, it's still a struggle, to be honest, for
Mhm.
me. It
Yeah,
really
I
is.
I work in a public school system. I'm an IT technician. My wife's a fifth grade teacher. So
God bless you, sir. You see everybody on the worst moment of their lives. Like the first day of school, I'm like, please, God, let my technology work for the love of God. And especially when it doesn't work, I'm like, we just need to see Fred. All I need for today,
yeah,
just Fred.
Yeah,
right?
I'm pretty proactive. We're pretty quick about doing it. So I find what we do to be the best possible thing because we get to come in and within 5 to 10 minutes, the kids are cheering and everybody's ecstatic
Yeah,
and happy, and then I'm out.
right. Mr. Joe, you're our hero. Like, exactly. But oh my gosh, women are just awful when our technology does not work. And we're like,
Well,
excuse me, Joe, why am I not your priority?
but I've understood. I've got to understand the female brain in a way that I
Oh,
never thought I
snap.
would before because it's just
Right.
really simple. Don't ask too many questions. Just come
Like,
in.
oh, and please God, Joe, don't ask me if I've turned it on and off. Is it plugged in?
I don't
Let's
ask
not be
anything.
stupid, right?
And
Like,
then
don't ask me what I already know. And so I pride myself on when I do call my IT guys. One of them used to be really grumpy. And I swear I said, finally said to him, I'm probably your only friend, right? Why are you trying to hurt my feelings? And he's like, okay. So like it's one of those things where I'm like, I have gone through everything I can do, which probably is also the thing you hate to hear because you're like, please tell me you didn't do all those things because I might have, yeah,
I
I
just go
get
out
it.
in the field. I just go out and I'm like, my whole thing is this. I'm going to take care of it. And that's it. I don't ask that many questions. I come in and I look at it. I
I
may
think
have
you're just
questions about,
domesticated, Joe. I
hey,
think you're just married. I
right.
think that's it.
Well,
Right?
yeah,
Like
it's
don't bite or don't poke the lion,
right,
right?
right. Just go in, just take care of it and get out. The kids are happy, everybody's happy.
That's
So
so great. I love it.
so
Yeah.
not only are you an educator, but you're a playwright and you're an author. So if I put you in your native language in front of a bunch of, like, let's say kindergartners or third graders, it's career day. One of the kids asks, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
I say, well, first and foremost, I am someone who loves to create and that I I love to try to take ideas and connect them and synthesize them and kind of weave them together. So I would say, I have been a quilter. You see some of the fabric behind me, for
Yeah.
instance. And I would say, sometimes you take little tiny pieces and put them together to make something new. And I work at a STEM elementary, so we talk a lot about being an engineer and a scientist and a technology. I like the idea of STEAM because we put arts in there. But all my life, I've loved to create, to perform, all of those things. So I would say I'm a teacher, but I'm also someone who just loves to create and I love words. And I love that words we can use words to either help people or make the world better or help people to understand something that they've never seen. So if I had never seen a penguin before, I could use words to describe that to you.
Yeah.
And then I could use my body as movement or whatever. So I would really, that's kind of what I would explain to children, as well as, that I used to do plays on stage and it's like TV, but people are really in front of you. So they can actually hear you sneezing and they can hear you whispering to your friend and all of those things. And that is exactly what I would tell children that I just love to create. And hopefully that is something that clicks for them. Right.
Yeah.
So they're like, I like to draw. Yep, that's creating. So, like, what other ways could we create? And then that would become a conversation, right?
So what
Because
did
we all started as children, right?
absolutely. Well, speaking of children, what did you want to be when you were in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
First, it was a veterinarian. I think all
Yeah.
children go through that. And
Yep.
then we went on a field trip to the veterinarian school in Pullman, Washington at Washington State. And I was so freaking grossed out because I saw these things in jars and they actually had like a horse carcass that they were, and I was like, nope. And also the idea that you have to put dogs down, that was just a no.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to be a writer. And then I wrote like this epic, I'm sure it was like 5, 6 pages of time travel, and I was really into like murder mysteries, which is highly inappropriate, I'm sure, for my age. But I just loved to pretend and I love to create. And one of the things that really stuck out to me before the pandemic even happened was the lack of creativity and imagination children were coming to my classroom with. They really did not think about the fact that they could be or pretend anything. They only wanted to be super literal, or they would only pretend that they were in a video game.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's weird. Because I remembered I was an only child, so I was my only playmate, right? So I had Fred from Scooby Doo, who was my imaginary friend, and we went everywhere together. Why I picked him, I have no idea because he's like the dumbest one. But I think Shaggy's even smarter than he was, right?
Yeah.
Or he just happenstance ended up solving the mystery with Scooby. But it's the idea that like I had to be my own playmate and create these worlds for myself. And So, I mean, and all my stuffies were alive, just like Toy Story. So that was huge for me when I thought, yeah, absolutely, our toys are alive, right? Because, and that was the imagination of a child. And I just feel like that has gotten, it's just become squashed as we perceive how the world has become, right? So this great quote, Fred Rogers said, "The insides of children have never changed. Like what we need, what we desire, what we want, what we crave, but it's the outside world that changes around them." So our world has become so incredibly fast paced. And my goal is, I was a child of the arts. I grew up in the community theater. I loved the smell of it. I loved creating new people and being with people who were pretending, right? So I just didn't, I couldn't even fathom why children wouldn't want to pretend to be something more than this little tiny box that they were coming into me with,
Yeah.
right?
So let's go back to that story of your time machine. If you could get into the time machine and go back in time and
Mhm.
see one event in human history, where are you going? What do you want to see unfold?
One event in human history. Um, it's so hard. There's so many.
Yes.
I almost, I almost want to I think maybe it's not an event, it's like people that I would surround myself with. Like if I could have a dinner with people,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm gonna probably show my conservative side, but I would love to sit in a room with like, I don't know, Jimmy Stewart, Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, Fred Rogers. There's a lot of men. I'm trying to think of women. Uh, my grandmother, like
Yeah.
just I I definitely am in love with the 30s and the 40s and that kind of collective feeling of family, right? Um, and then there's a part of me because I'm so passionate about developmental trauma to be able to go back and befriend my mother and my father as children because they came with so many wounds when they had me. And so being able to be a good friend. So I think and helpful. My mother suffered a lot of abuse, and I would have loved to have been the friend that said, "I'm going to tell somebody, and I'm going to tell until somebody listens."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, it's more personal. Um, but some of the events that really profoundly affected me was the Challenger when it exploded in the 80s. And when Reagan came on, because we were all watching that as children. And that was what we call, a collective trauma where we all experienced it together. And Krista McCullough was a teacher and she was going up into space. And that's just so exciting, right? And then, but how Reagan came on and spoke to the children of America, which ended up being the backdrop of one of my most uh, produced plays. It was an original play called Mrs. Murphy's Porch. And it was really about how as a child, I perceived that
Yeah.
and what that was like to come against evil, right? Or to something so horrific
Yeah.
and tragedy. So I think, I think for me, I'm much more magical realism as far as going back and trying to right some wrongs or hang out with people who were trendsetters, right?
Yeah.
Maybe Ruby Bridges, maybe going back and being a friend to her when she entered school,
Yeah.
right? Or like I just think about how, and that's what I try to do with children is, you know what, like when we talk about, we always end up talking about cancer because Fred Rogers died of cancer and bad things happen sometimes, but not always. And so, um, or maybe being a teacher at Columbine,
Yeah.
that would have raised the flag more,
Yeah.
you know, um, because there were people that did.
Yeah.
And there were teachers, and one of the English teachers did. She was proactive and said, "I'm very concerned about Dylan Klebold and his writing." So it's really just being another person that teacher could have like said, "Hey, I'm really concerned about Dylan." Reading what he was writing and saying, "Absolutely." And I am such a big mouth, and I always get in trouble for continuing to bulldoze through things when I know that they're right for children. That I would not have stopped. And so that's the kind of stuff I think about. What about you? What would you do? Where would you go?
I would probably, I've
Are
asked
you
this.
a witness or are you a like are you involved in the process of what's going on? That's probably the
I
question.
would probably be a witness. I would probably
Okay.
see something seminal. That I don't know. I almost like the idea of going back and see my dad as a kid because there
Yeah.
was a lot of things that happened that became who he was that wasn't a part of the early lore of him. Now, when I think about sports, I was a big Mets fan. I would have been there when the ball went between Billy Buckner's legs. I would have loved to have been in that stadium.
Perfect. Yeah. Or Shoeless Joe Jackson. Like, were you a Field of Dreams kind of kid?
Oh,
Like,
I
did
went
you
to
love? Oh,
Dyersville like 6 times. Yeah.
yeah. Like, I mean, there's things like that just are so magical,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And people don't realize that they're in the presence of something that is so ironic or iconic, and or being in Times Square on D-Day.
Yeah.
I got to represent the United States in '94 with a singing group. We went over to Omaha Beach for the invasion of the 50th anniversary of the invasion of Normandy. And so for me, it was just being able to stand in that place and hear taps
Yeah.
and the national anthem and realize like this really happened here, right? And so when my son was a senior, we took him back. And so having my kids see that, and then to meet a man who was on the second wave of Omaha Beach, and he was like, he had never shared his story until he knew that I had stood in the same place. And I think that's what I'm so passionate about is the interconnectedness of the human race, like that we all have things that matter to us. And the arts is a huge part of that. Like that you can sing, for instance, when I was doing a lot of off Broadway stuff, they said, first you have to say it. If you can't just say it, you have to sing it. And then if you can't just sing it, you have to dance it. And I just love that concept of like, we have to keep creating to help people understand more of the depth
Yeah.
of all things,
Yeah.
right?
I agree. So who's been a hero for you?
Well, definitely Fred Rogers. He was a huge one for me. But he was in pinnacle with, or he was interwoven to my own healing with attachment, as far as recognizing that he was right all along, and that's why he was in our consciousness. And he's also, I was able to go back to Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and read his personal papers, and that was just humbling because of the fact that he was just so incredibly real and raw, and a lot of people didn't see that about him. And so he chose every day intentionally to show up and do what was right. And I I've thought it for a long time about being a truth teller, right? Because people don't like truth tellers. They're kind of like they become scapegoats, and they become scapegoats in families, right? So we become like the healthiest people in our family because we're like, that wasn't okay that,
Right.
like your dad, that wasn't okay that that happened to you, dad. And so it shapes us. And Fred had a lot of things that shaped him because of the fact that he had a mother who was a hypochondriac as well as so incredibly insecurely attached. And so that passed to him. And so that was something that he worked through forever. And then when I was looking through his papers, I ended up finding his own traumas. And I think the thing that I love the most about working with his work is that it's not perfect, but the world perceived it that way just because it was so intentionally focused on what was right for children. But I've seen a huge pendulum switch or shift with the fact that when I entered education, it was like this beautiful, sacred thing. You became a teacher, and that was like your life's work. And in the last year or so, I've actually questioned, do I want to keep doing this? Which I never thought. But we have gone so far the opposite, where we are so worried about offending everyone that we do nothing that is going to actually make the considerable difference, right? So it's all about jumping through hoops. And for me, I've become incredibly aware of that is that is going to psychologically traumatize a child. That's the stuff that we don't get over, like those paper cuts. So I think realizing that he got that at the beginning of when they were really researching that in the 60s and applied it throughout his entire career. And so now what I do is I just try to kind of step into the same stream he was in. I find his footprints, but they're underneath the water, right? So like people can run along the side and go, "Oh, that was so great." And we need people like Mr. Rogers. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You have to be that for children.
Yeah.
Like he's not going to come and do that for us. And he left the roadmap. So he is definitely, yeah. And then also my grandmother,
Yeah.
to be honest, and my grandfather, because my grandfather was in AA my entire life and he couldn't help his own children. And that was a really good lesson for me to look at too, where he had many, many people that came and said, he saved my life. And he said these words to people. He always said, take care of yourself, Joe, because you're important. And when he would say that to people, there were many people who were contemplating suicide and they would choose not to do it. And people just need to know that they matter. And And then also my grandmother just being that absolute solid, secure base. We all need that one person who is home, who is our neighborhood, who is that place where we can return to and know that no matter how messed up things are, that person's going to receive me and love me. But it's crazy in our life now with all the likes on Facebook and all those things. We think we're connected and secure, and we don't have a lot of people that we actually would turn to at 2 o'clock in the morning, right?
Yeah.
So it's this false security and this false uh, connectedness that I think we have. So I love, if I had it, and you said the word time machine, and that's what I feel like I do every single day when I turn on the neighborhood. I do not turn on the cartoons. Because Fred Rogers Productions has gone on to do Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood and all these things, and I'm like, because they need him. Like we've made every like old man a creepy pedophile now, and like you couldn't just walk up and be like, wow, and put your hand on someone and say, your son is a wonderful little boy. They'd be like, what's up with Joe? Does
Yeah.
that make sense? Like we're so suspicious as a society,
Mm.
and it's gross. And
Yeah.
I I had neighbors that an old Swedish welder that lived across the way, and he would always know where I was because he was one of my dad's best friends. And the smell of welding is very comforting to me because I would sit there while he had all of his stuff on and he'd be welding. And but I knew that Ralph would always be in my corner. And I knew Mrs. Sprouse, who couldn't walk hardly, would always answer her door if I knocked, and Walt behind me. And they were elderly, but they were people that knew me.
Yeah.
Like our neighborhoods have disappeared, or
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What about you? Who is it for you?
Oh man, my dad was a big influence on me. I actually met my hero, realistically
Ooh,
speaking, about 2 months. Dwight Gooden, the pitcher for the New York Mets. Are you familiar with him?
wow. But I think that's amazing. Like uh when you meet those people, I had a lot of that happen off Broadway too, where I one of my friends, J.O. Sanders, he's a huge, he's been in everything. And we would walk, and he's a giant, like 6'6" or 6'4". And we'd walk down the street in New York and people would ask him for help. And I thought it was interesting. I said, is it because you're a giant? He's like, I don't know. And I said, I think because they recognize your face,
Yeah.
but they don't realize they recognize it. So they trust it.
Yeah.
Right? So how did you end up did you interview him for this, or what happened?
I actually, I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for a while, like an independent journalist, and I have a jazz radio show. I found out that he was coming to town. We have a Negro Leagues baseball museum, and he was inducted into
Beautiful.
something called the Hall of Game. And I was like, this is my time to meet him.
This
And
is it.
it was unreal. The whole thing was unreal. Like he was coming into the room, didn't know anybody from Adam, and literally walked up to me and shook my hand. And I loved him.
That's yes.
I had
It's like your
posters in my room.
energy pulled him
It,
to.
it, it,
But
it-
what did you notice about him? He was real,
he was, but
right?
there was the thing about Dwight is that he had a lot of drug problems and a lot of run-ins with the law, and that kind of
Mm,
took over his career and really was a ding on him. But what I sensed about him was that he never quit. He ended up going and playing for the Yankees and pitching no hitter, all these things. But I felt when I was in the room with him that there was a genteel nature that he genuinely like has learned from what he's done, and he's like taking care of things that he didn't take care of early on, and it exudes
I
from him.
love that.
But he was wonderful. Yeah, my
Yeah.
my son was with me, and he's special needs,
How
and
old is he?
he's eight. He was 18 at the time, and we just did this thing called Challenge Air, where we flew over Kansas City. It's all they fly special needs kids around. It's a Vietnam vet that set up this
Uh-huh.
operation, and we had
Almost like
just
a
gotten
make a
down.
wish, but like, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
exactly. Yeah. So we had just done that. I didn't know if I was going to make it. There was all this weird construction, and we finally get in there, and he meets us, and he was just so good. I mean, just very nice, very, very approachable. I did interview him. I asked
It's
him a
like
few
a
questions.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of like a divine experience, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so Mr. McFeely, David Newell, is still alive, and he's a good friend of mine. And so uh, my son and I went up to see Yo-Yo Ma, who was the cellist,
Yeah.
and he was really good friends with Fred Rogers as well, and so was Itzhak Perlman, the violinist. And so I've been able to see some of these people because I'm like, they're getting old, they're going to try. I
Yeah.
need to see them, and just knowing that they knew Fred is just really amazing, and I've gotten to know his family as well. But David is wonderful because we went out to dinner and my son was there, and he's in his early 20s, and he sat there and David just focused on Ben, my
Mhm.
son, and just like he's always like, "Is your mother always this way?" And they made fun of me or whatever. But the idea was, first of all, we were getting really crappy service because the Pittsburgh Steelers were having kind of a little shindig in there, and they were really into this, like the fact that they were in there with their girlfriends and their coaches and everything, and that they were just not focused on us. And so this kid, I said, "How old are you?" And he said, I'm 43." And I said, "Do you know who this is?" And David's like, "Oh, Wisty, don't do that." And I'm like, "This is Mr. McFeely from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood." And the kid literally gasped and started to cry. And he goes, "Oh my God, Mr. McFeely." He goes, "Can I get you anything?" We got such great service. And
Yep.
David was like, "Wisty." But I was like, he needed to know.
Yeah.
Like he was giving crap service to
Uh-huh.
Mr. McFeely.
Yep.
Right. But at the end of it, uh, we talked or whatever. He made a little video for my kindergartners, and what's so funny is I was on my phone for like 2 years, and then I thought, oh, I'll just upload this to TikTok to have fun. 41,000 people commented in an hour, and I was like, whoa, David, you still got it.
Yeah.
So, and they were crying and going crazy over it. But my son was like, "Mom, I feel like this was like spending time with Fred because Fred Rogers was incredibly shy, and so he did not like to do a lot of PR kind of stuff. And David is really gregarious. He was theater trained, that sort of thing. And so he loves it. Like
Yeah.
he is just loves to soak it up. So it was the same thing with for Ben. He just loves talking about it, tells me great stories. Um and it was just so special for my son
Yeah.
because he got to spend time with him and ask questions and just really be seen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And those are the kind of encounters that are just so special,
Yeah.
right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, I totally get it. I love
Yeah.
that. What a
Yeah.
great story too. And to
Yeah.
have, I mean, you must have been hard to sleep after such a cool day,
I
like to
came
be doing all this stuff,
I
or
came
you were
out
exhausted.
I came out, I didn't because my son's on the spectrum, so I had to be very careful about what I told him to build it up. So
Uh-huh.
when I came out, I was really emotional and he was like, "What's the matter?" And I was like, "I just met my guy. I met my hero." And he didn't realize it because I didn't want to build him up. I have to be very careful. So I got in the car
Right.
and I told him the whole story. I said, ever since I was a kid, posters, everything. And I met my hero. And I said, "What do you think about that?" And he said, "Well, he's my hero now too." So it was
Oh,
cool. Yeah. So it was
good
the whole thing was just crazy.
job, Dad.
It was
Fist
fun.
bump through the
There
screen,
you go.
right? Like, yes. And it's really hard uh to children have a hard time when they see us be emotional because
Yeah.
they don't know if they're the cause of it. And especially being on the spectrum, they're kind of like,
Yeah.
you might have like where he's like, "Well, that's stupid. Why are you crying?" Or
Mhm.
you might have the opposite where he's so highly empathetic that he thinks he did it. And so letting children know, like, I'm crying because it just like I cried the first time I looked out at my students when they were sitting on the carpet and they didn't have masks on.
Yeah.
Oh, trying to teach reading with masks on was so hard. The difference between and good luck with that,
Yeah.
friend, right? But just I took a picture of them and put it in my journal because they were so exquisitely beautiful to me.
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
what we lost when we couldn't see people's faces. And
Yeah.
so I just think there's such power in being able to like for you to be able to explain that to your son and say this is why that mattered so much to me
Sure.
is a powerful moment,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah. 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 It was
I can
huge.
see why you safeguarded it though. You're like, dude, this could go so wrong so
Uh-huh.
quick.
Just make it just go with the flow. So
Just a regular guy we're talking to,
that's it.
right?
That's it. We're hanging out.
And
So
please don't let anything weird happen. Please,
yeah.
God,
Yeah, but
right?
he was genuinely interested in Miles. He was just kinda looking over and was very curious. There's just something about the way he is that people are kinda pulled in. I met Jason Mewes from, Mallrats and Clerks and all of that, the Kevin Smith
Uh-huh.
sidekick. We went to
Right.
Comic-Con and I had a really good garage sale. I sell art in a garage sale and I made a lot of money that day, and I'm like, "Let's go to
Right.
Comic-Con and let's meet him." He didn't care about me,
Right.
but when Miles came up, he was all over him, like, totally, like,
Right.
pulled in and
Like quirky to quirk. I know like it's almost like yeah, like and it's I guess because I grew up in the theater, quirky people are my people. Like
yeah,
the people that just like, and we had a small school for a while, and my mentor and I always say, "Oh, they're an Oasis kid," because like the kids that we had were the not the rejects, but they were just the kids that just they were the square peg in the round hole, right? Like they were just they're the ones that would come to school in a cape or like. And we have a little girl that's in kindergarten, and every day she's like in a Spider-Man outfit or Woody,
Yep.
or I'm like, "Hey, Woody, where's Jesse?" And she's like, or where's Bullseye or whatever. Like, but she's her own little girl. And I love like frilly dresses with rubber boots. And I love like unconventional things because that I feel like is real. Like, and so the thing that came to my mind when you're talking about Miles, correct? Is that was his
Yes.
name?
Yeah.
Is the fact that I feel like you talked about his story. And I feel as though people who have either gone through recovery or really like that they say the dark night of the soul or whatever it might be, where they've been shattered for some reason, or they've had to humbly come before themselves, like in front of a mirror and say, wow, I totally botched it, or I'm not. Why am I an addict? Like, or why is this addiction upon me? Like, what pain have I been running from? That sort of thing. I feel like broken people are the most holy people I've ever met, and that
Right.
that feeling of gentleness comes from understanding that we are just okay, that radical acceptance of like, I am a beautiful disaster,
Yeah.
right? And if I can help other people know that that is okay, my biggest enemy, I feel like, is the people that act like they got it all together when I know they're a freaking mess.
Yeah.
Like that is my biggest nemesis in education. Because when I wrote my book, it was truly because I was tired of watching people emotionally bleed out on other people. And I felt like it's not okay for us to pretend that we're okay when we're not, because what happens is we just pass that crap. Like your dad, right? Like things happened to him and then he didn't have the responses of the regulation to be able to pass on what he needed to you, and so it passes. And so what do we know about that? Unless we are cycle breakers or we ask really hard questions and we name, like, and it's okay to name something, and it doesn't mean that we don't love that person. Like, that was not okay that you did that to me, dad. I know that you love me, but that was abusive, or that was neglect, or that was, and you might not have to say that to them, but we
Right.
have to say it to ourselves, right? And that was the journey I took to be able to say, it makes sense that I had the problems that I did. It makes sense when people do turn to addiction, because of the fact that it's not a choice. It's a really big symptom of pain.
Yeah.
Like our pain is getting so unbearable. When I finally healed from a lot of behavior addictions, I sat in this recovery group with a woman who I've literally watched her life transform again, but she had just left meth, and she was barely clean, and she was just sobbing. And she said, I just want to be high because I can feel everything. And sometimes that familiar, but we say that the familiar hell is better than the unfamiliar heaven. Like, so what you're experiencing in his presence is just that feeling of he knows who he is, he can't change it, right? Like he can't change the past. And my counselor once said to me, at the end there will just be good left.
Yeah.
If you really wrestle with the darkness, right? Like there will be good left. So I'm excited that you got to experience him now.
Yeah.
What if you would have experienced him when he was using? There were
Yeah.
people that came up to him and he was probably not who you encountered.
Right.
Like I think to myself, so thankful for more time or more grace or
Yeah.
more love or more forgiveness, because there were times that I'm not proud of, but I look at that as like that's also such an amazing gift to be able to give the world,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
time is running out, and we
Sure.
veered in a very good way into wonderful things, very natural, wonderful waters. But I want to make sure that we get everything the good business in. Where can they pick up your book? How can anybody learn more
Well,
about you?
yeah.
Reach out, anything.
Right. So this is it. It came out the 26th of September. It's called Waiting for Mr. Rogers, Teaching with Attachment, Attunement, and Attention. But and these pictures from Lynn Johnson are just absolutely exquisite. Things that
Yeah.
people probably haven't seen a lot of Fred. And she followed him around over a period of about 3 years. And I asked her, like, if you could be with Fred for just any more time, what would you want to do? What would you want to say? And she said, I would just want to, and you're going to love this, just sit in his presence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's not just for teachers though. It came from my journey of healing insecure attachment, which we all have an attachment style. So if people were to go to my website, it's wysteriaedwards.com. So as in yo-yo, Steria Edwards.com. They can take a 60-second attachment style quiz, and it will give them, from what I get from that little tiny bit, it will give you your attachment style, and then it will help you to understand that insecure attachment can be healed only through interactions with and experiences, right? So once someone has secure attachment, we can borrow from their nervous system. So if our mother didn't give that to us,
Yeah.
then we can actually gain that. So because our brain is plastic, right? So it can be moldable and shapeable. So and that's exactly what Fred Rogers did, is he took attachment theory and he wove it into the show. And that's why we are endeared to him.
Yeah.
He looked into the camera, eye contact, all the things that when you started to go, what's going on with my kid? Right? Like, why is he not looking me in the eye? Why is that empathy piece? Like, what's going on there? So, all of those things that you cued in on are parts of secure,
Yeah.
right? Like, something's going on with his brain. So, this is what I started to apply in the classroom when I had a little boy that came in, and he was an absolute disaster and he was so broken. And what I did as a last resort is I turned on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, because I was like, he has so many problems. I don't know where to start. And we label everything in education. So if people want to learn more about attachment, and attunement is really that piece of attachment, attunement, and attention. So, like, attunement is taking off our shoes and entering the emotional experience of someone else and allowing it to affect us.
Yeah.
Not necessarily feeling it for someone, but like he was sitting there saying, "Why, Dad? Why do you feel that way?" Right? So,
Yeah.
like, that is part of us being able to come alongside people and say, I can recognize that this is going on for you and I'm right here. And Fred was always
Yeah.
changing his shoes and taking
Yeah.
them off. So they can definitely go to my website, find that there. I have a podcast as well. And then they can buy the book anywhere. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble. But I would please ask people to ask their independent booksellers, because we need to make sure that little mom and pops, independent bookstores do not go out of business. So if you can ask for this, I would really appreciate you asking people, like, ask your favorite bookstore to bring it in.
Sure.
And yeah, it's really about just going into our own stories, seeing how that wove into who we are as caregivers and people.
Excellent. That was perfect. We're getting ready. It's going to click off. It's literally going to go off like an
Boom.
old TV. Wysteria, thank you so
Yeah.
much. This has been wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you for your energy.
Oh my goodness, what a pleasure. Yes. Thank you
absolutely.
for having me, Joe.
You
All
bet.
right, take care, my friends.
Best of
Be
luck.
well.